Hi everyone, thank you so much to everybody who's watched the film of the River Severn expedition and who submitted questions. So I'm going to take a few minutes now just to answer some of those questions. I find it easier to actually talk about these things than write about them sometimes because there's quite a lot of nuance in some of the discussions that we have around plastic pollution and environmentalism. So bear with me and I'm going to make my way through the questions now. Thank you again everybody who's submitted these questions. It's really great to get a discussion going and to get you guys involved in this as well. So excellent work. Thank you very much for submitting them. Okay, so the first one I'm going to tackle is a three-part question. The first question is, what was the most common type of plastic objects that you came across throughout your journey? I want to know if I can avoid purchasing that object. So the most common type of plastic I came across paddling from the source of the River Severn out to sea, I'd say that most common was probably plastic bottles, and that's possibly just because that's one of the items that floats on the river. So what I was finding was stuff that was either floating or stuck in the trees that were going down the side of the river. And unfortunately, that's just the tip of the iceberg. A lot of plastic sinks, so there'll be quite a lot I should expect at the bed of the river as well. So plastic bottles were really common. There was one stretch where I found heaps and heaps of plastic water bottles. Now that's obviously one of the most avoidable single-use plastic items out there, and it always I find it a little bit upsetting when I find heaps and heaps of plastic water bottles in the environment, because we have an amazing resource in this country, which is tap water. It's clean and it's safe and it's free right from our taps. And so the solution to that is obviously using a reusable water bottle and not buying plastic water bottles in the first place. I said a minute ago about stuff lining getting stuck in the trees that were lining the banks of the River Severn. And what happens there is when the water level rises and it floods cities or towns, it can take a lot of plastic with it and flow all the way down the river. And at that point in time, things can get stuck in the branches of the trees, and then the river level drops and they remain in the trees. So I was finding a lot of plastic sheeting in there. A lot of it was agricultural, so from hay bales, silage bales, plastic bags as well. And one thing I found in one particular stretch of river was a lot of stuff that had obviously been flushed down the loo. So things like wet wipes, baby wipes, sanitary products, really not nice stuff, just clogged in the trees there. And then I'd say the other most common thing was things like crisp packets. So again, these are things that are floating on the surface, single-use plastic items, and they're avoidable if you want to make that choice not to buy bagged crisps. That's individual choice. And was there anything else kind of that I found regularly? I found lots of things like footballs and frisbees, and they're not obviously going to have been purposely dumped in the river. And a lot of the stuff that I'm finding isn't purposely dumped in the river. It's finding its way there. It's either being washed down the streets or been accidentally dropped. Although some of it will have been lobbed in the river purposely, that's not always the case. I'm going to come on to that again in a moment. So the second part of this question is, sometimes I have no choice but to buy something wrapped in plastic. For example, cucumbers are cling film wrapped. I don't have an allotment yet and there's no green grocers store near me, so I've purchased them in this way. How can this be changed? So the first thing I want to say about that is it's really important, I think, that we try not to feel too guilty about the plastic that we can't avoid at the moment. This is a journey, and it's a journey for us and for the producers and for the legislation. I think at the moment so many people are helping to share ways that we can use less plastic. So many businesses are trying to find ways to sell their products without plastic for their consumers, but this isn't perfect yet, and it's really, really hard to live a completely plastic-free life. And so rather than feeling guilty for what you can't do, I think it's really important at this stage to be celebrating what we can do positively. So if you have to buy your cucumbers in plastic wrap at this point in time, I really don't think we should be beating up ourselves as individuals for that. However, I think it is really important that we continue to put pressure on the companies to help make it easier for us to live with less plastic. So that's where our voice as consumers comes in, rather than all the onus falling upon us, rather than us being the ones that feel guilty for the plastic that we're using. We need to be using our voice as consumers to ask the producers to be selling products to us with less pointless plastic. There's a big argument with salad items regarding food waste, so we need to be careful that we're not creating loads of food waste by having our products outside of not wrapped in single-use plastic. But things like buying more locally to yourself and trying to source farms which are able to produce food locally, which doesn't need to be wrapped and doesn't need to be stored for months on end so it can be transported halfway across the world, is a great way to get around that. I know you've said that there's no greengrocer near you, so that's obviously a tricky one for your specific situation there, whoever asked that question. But I really would say please try not to feel too guilty for what you can't do and just focus on what you can do for the minute. And there's no reason why you can't go into your supermarket and ask them to, write them a letter or speak to the manager and ask them to stock items which are out of plastic. Every person whose voice is heard in this campaign it is making a difference, and the producers, the companies, the businesses, the shops, they're starting to step up and actually take note of those voices and make changes in their businesses. Third part of this question: what was the worst and best part of your journey? What are your next steps to ensure that the government moves forward? How can I help further? I think you're amazing. Thank you very much. That's a really kind comment, and I think you've hit the nail on the head with asking what the next steps are to make sure the government moves forward, because this is a three-pronged attack. Plastic pollution, it's not just down to the individual. We've got to make sure that this conversation and this campaign involves government and companies as well, particularly companies who are making huge profits from selling products in plastic packaging. Everybody needs to step up to this. So in terms of how we create that change, certainly talking to the businesses that you shop at, and shopping at ethical businesses who are making the moves to reduce the amount of plastic that's being used in their operations. There are loads of campaigns specifically lobbying the government, and there are a couple of great charities actually working specifically on that. So I'd recommend checking out Surfers Against Sewage and City to Sea. They're both doing really great work actually trying to create policy change within a governmental level. So check out those charities and add your voice to their petitions. I think just trying to talk about how you feel about this, make it known that you care about this, write to your MP, get involved in local litter picks. The more people do that, the more it shows that there are enough consumers and enough voters who care about this, that change needs to happen. Okay, and moving on from that, there's a question here. There's been so much talk about the government, about the environment, plastic and litter, but only a small gesture from councils, governments, supermarkets, etc. seem to have taken place. It must be relatively easy to replace plastic bags by now, surely. Also, litter in the country could be dealt with even in the short term with CCTV, litter wardens who could enforce fines. Not many people take any heed to notice and polite requests. So this is a really interesting one. How do we stop littering? And replacing plastic bags. So yes, you'd have thought it would be easy to replace plastic bags, and I certainly did when I first came into this, and I was very kind of black and white about it, and we just need to stop using them altogether, just stop selling them, and I think there is still an argument for that. There are anything in industry, especially when we're talking about big business, it takes a long time for change to come in, and what I've learned through kind of my campaigns and working with various organisations and companies is that what we think is going to be a super easy change to make can often be months and years worth of work within a business structure. So I mean, the one example I have that is the Mid-Counties Co-operative switched to compostable carrier bags instead of plastic bags. It's not perfect, we still need to be using reusable bags where we can, and if we do use compostable bags, actually making sure that they're composted so that they go into our food waste bin if the local council will collect that compost bag as a food waste bin liner. The best option obviously is just to reuse what we already have and not use any new products. Every new product has its own carbon footprint, whether it's plastic or not. In terms of kind of just replacing like that, I think we've got to keep putting pressure on companies to stop using and stop selling plastic bags. And when that legislation came in a few years ago that put the 5p charge in for plastic bags, the amount used overnight dropped by 85%. And so legislation is really powerful as well, and I think trying to kind of continue to lobby for stricter guidance on single-use plastic use is really important here. In terms of chucking rubbish out and about, I get so angry about it too, because it just seems so unnecessary. If you take something with you, you can take away your rubbish at the end of the day as well. So that's a really, really tricky one to get my head around as well. And I think you're right. You know, having litter wardens, having CCTV, all that kind of stuff, I think it's sometimes easier said than done, and it needs enforcing. But that's where your voice as a voter, as a member of your constituent, can be really useful. So if you've got something that you feel particularly passionate about in your area, write to your MP, let them know your ideas and see what their kind of pushbacks are on that, or whether they've even thought about it, and see how you can help to kind of encourage them to make change at a local level. I think change is really happening, and in terms of this idea that, you know, it's got to come from individuals and government and companies, that is happening, and a lot of it's happening because there are so many individuals who care now, and so we really need to keep banging on that drum and keep making our voices heard as to how important this is to us, because that's the only way that it's going to incentivise government and companies to do something different. Okie dokie. Why can't we go back to glass bottles? They can be reused time and time again. It's a really good point. I think a lot of people are kind of going back to glass bottles. A lot of companies are trying to package things in glass bottles. Transporting glass has a much higher carbon footprint than transporting plastic, just because it's so much heavier. So we have to be mindful of that as well, I think. And I think this comes back again to this idea that actually we need to be looking at solutions to single use, not just solutions to single use plastic. So actually looking at where we can refill things instead of using single use containers at all, and that would include glass. Glass, however, it is infinitely recyclable, and it's can be reused time and time again. Things like milk bottles, if that's delivered to you. So yes, it is in terms of kind of the health, the negative health implications of plastic as well. Glass doesn't kind of harbour the same chemicals that plastic does. Plastic can harbour some pretty nasty chemicals and carcinogens, so glass is preferable in that regard as well. So yeah, there are pros and cons of glass, and you know, we can all make these choices when we're shopping as well, whether we buy things that's in glass or plastic. But one thing I would say is just be mindful that transporting anything in glass is going to be a little bit more carbon consumptive. Okay. Why is there cling film type wrapping around the big trolleys used for restocking shelves? There must be a more eco solution. Yes, there must be a more eco solution. And I actually watched someone wrap up a big pallet full of products recently in all that plastic stuff, and I was like screaming inside, like, come on, you don't need, like, surely there's a better way. The thing is, this is what it's been this is how it's been for years, and so actually we're trying to create a way that is going to still be as profitable for people, whilst also not destroying the environment. And I think that's where we need people to we need more businesses to appreciate where, so say more profitable, I think we need kind of more values driven businesses where their bottom line isn't their biggest kind of indicator of success. Unfortunately, in our current society, oftentimes that is the case. But there are other ways to do things, and I know of a few businesses who now use big reusable crates to transport their stuff around in. Again, with the kind of consumer side of things, with consumer pressure, a lot of what businesses will do is make their consumer facing side of things more eco-friendly, without necessarily always looking back to the other stages in their production. So that's why we need to be writing to supermarkets and saying, what are you doing differently? I think there has been some technological developments in terms of those big wrapping things, certainly with I was saying before about the plastic wrapping I was finding in the trees down the River Severn. A lot of that's from agricultural usage, so hay bales and that kind of thing. There was development recently for an edible silage wrap, so all that plastic wrap wasn't needed. It could be, you know, made with compostable, edible materials, which is obviously going to be better for the cow as well if the cow ingests it. So I think technologies are coming through, but the only way that it's people are going to invest in it and want to use it, unless they are really values driven, is if we continue to put pressure on as consumers. So that's potentially something that we could be writing to the supermarkets and asking them about. Thank you for the person who said, well done, what a great effort. Thank you very much. It's very interesting that after Shrewsbury, any big town or city, the river had more plastic in it. What do you think can be done to educate people living in these areas that they should respect their local water sources? Is it up to local councils and authorities to implement this? I think it's a bit of both, and unfortunately when you're walking on the riverside you'll often find bins right on the side of the river. Now that is fantastic because it means that people are more likely to put their plastic and their waste in the bin than in the river. However, they need to be emptied regularly, so that's definitely up to local authorities and councils, and I think they need to really take responsibility for making sure that there isn't piled up waste next to a river that could potentially be blown into that river in any kind of storm. I do think there is definitely individual responsibility here to dispose of any litter that we do use properly, so that it's not going on the floor and then being washed out into the rivers. And certainly, you don't have to live next door to a river for your waste to end up there. That's something that I wanted to make quite clear with this expedition in this film, is that we all live pretty close to a body of water, and so even if I kind of, I live a mile from the sea, if I threw my plastic bottle on the street here, or if I dropped it accidentally and it landed on the street here, all it would take would be an easterly wind or a load of rain, and that's going out into the ocean. And it's similar to people who anybody who lives near a river. You could live a couple of miles away from one. The path of least resistance is often through the streets down to the river. And so I think this is more about systemic change and more about learning, for everybody to learn how we need to dispose of our waste, how to use less, so that we're using less single-use items in the first place, and so there's less to dispose of and less to actually get lost in the environment. And oftentimes I think in terms of local councils and authorities, what I think they need to be doing is helping to educate their local population on how best to dispose of their waste, because each council has a different way of recycling, of disposing of rubbish, and it's quite confusing for the consumer, because I live in a place where down the road it could be a different next county along could be a completely different way of disposing their waste to where I live. So I think there needs to be some more education from the local councils, and definitely more kind of determination from everybody to dispose of our litter properly. And coming on to that, there's a question. I live in an apartment with shared waste facilities. I could cry when I see the volume of content of waste. I've tried Facebook messaging the tenant group. Do you have any posters or know of any sources of posters that encourage sorting waste? A beautiful image of the natural world with words would be good, I think. People are so unresponsive to the facts, but I still want to try. Thank you. I think that's a really, I totally get it. Like, there's someone down my road, every time it's bin day, there's no recycling in the recycling boxes, all black bin bags, nothing gets sorted and recycled. And the only thing you can do is either have those conversations really respectfully. So I think shaming people and judging people, we have no idea what anyone else's personal situation is, and I think shaming them and trying to force our views onto somebody else is really unhelpful a lot of the time. We've got to help people to make their own mind up about why it's important to them, and I think the idea of having a beautiful image of the natural world is really great, because you're connecting the dots then, aren't you, between what's going on with their waste disposal and the natural world. And I think sometimes people, we it's really easy to judge, but we can't. I feel such a connection to the ocean and to the natural world and to rivers, but not everybody does, and unfortunately not everybody's going to get this immediately. I think we need to find ways that we can help people to find their connection to the natural world so that they'll want to protect it. So I think an idea of a really beautiful poster is a great idea. There's an online app called Canva it's really easy to use. If you've got a photo of the natural world, or you can probably find one on there, you just upload it and then put some type on it saying, you know, this is how you sort your recycling or whatever. I think you could make a post yourself. Otherwise, perhaps get in touch with the local councils, and the local council might have some educational material around waste disposal that they could help you with. And I think, yeah, kind of sticking them up around where the bins are is a good idea. And you know, maybe if you do bump into the people who are doing it, could you have a kind of a gentle conversation, even if it's just sowing a seed, even if you don't get anywhere initially, rather than kind of blaming and shaming. Can you have that conversation as a discussion initially? I don't know what your relationship with these guys is, so you know, that's got to be up to you as to whether you think it's appropriate. It is really hard, and I think it's one thing I've definitely found with campaigning around plastic. Some people have very strong opinions on it in both directions, and you know, you can't get through past those opinions, and also some people just really don't want to be engaged in those conversations. Either they feel it's not for them, it's not relevant to them, or they just don't care. And that's something I feel very passionately about, is that we kind of, how have we become this disconnected as a society from our natural world and our impact on our natural world? We've really got to find a way to reconnect to that, so that we can, you know, create more drive amongst our society to look after this amazing planet that we live on. So good luck with that, and I hope you get on okay with that. Okay, next question. Did you notice a reduction in plastic pollution following lockdown? I mean, after lockdown, we weren't really doing community beach cleans as much because we weren't allowed to be together. So it was quite hard to tell. I don't think I saw a reduction. If anything, I saw an increase because of all the PPE. And certainly over the last couple of months, I've noticed more and more face masks and gloves littering the waterways and the streets. And there have been some stats that have come out about beach cleans around the world, which are now finding more and more face masks and gloves, which is really, really sad. The thing with this pandemic is it's new and it's scary for all of us, and so I think people have responded in a way that has, you know, prioritised keeping safe in the immediate moment. And now we know a little bit more about it, I think it's time that we really all start to go back to looking at our use of single use, and you know, we have to be wearing face masks for many things in society at the moment, but a reusable face mask for a lot of situations is appropriate. We don't always need to be wearing single-use face masks. Obviously in a medical setting, and for some people it is necessary to wear a single-use face mask, but for most of us in everyday settings, going to the shops, a reusable mask is appropriate. And similarly with gloves, at the start of this, a lot of people were wearing single-use plastic gloves everywhere they went because they were terrified, and I don't think we should be, you know, necessarily judging that. Now we know that washing your hands and sanitising your hands in an everyday setting, not in a medical setting, and you know, some people need to still be wearing gloves because they're very vulnerable, but for most of us it can be, you know, just washing our hands can be sufficient. So I'm hoping that the conversation will start to swing back towards how we look after our planet, because we were making some really great headway before the coronavirus pandemic hit. So I'm really hopeful that we can get back there. You know, we've had legislation change in the last week. The campaign was successful in the government have now banned single-use plastic straws in the UK, and stirrers, you know, the cocktail stirrers, the coffee stirrers, and cotton buds for your ears made of plastic. There are paper and cardboard alternatives, and this is a huge step. It might seem like such a simple thing, and going back to what we were saying before, why couldn't we just ban it overnight? You know, years ago when we first started realising this was an issue. Frustratingly, and I get that it's frustratingly these things take time, but you know, I really do believe that we're going to look back on this in 5 or 10 years and we'll have all this new legislation in place and these different ways of doing things, and we'll be looking back on, I don't know, the 20th century and saying, my God, can you imagine using that much plastic now? Like, just how crazy it was that we were so unconscious of it. So this is a journey, and it's a it's a journey that we're in for the long haul, but got to keep positive and keep kind of moving forward, and believing that we can make change together. I'm rambling on now, I'm sorry, I've just got a couple more questions to do. Okay, this is a paddleboarding question. What type of leash do you recommend for supboarding? So I don't know if you noticed it in the river film, I was wearing a waist leash. It goes around my waist, it's got a quick release toggle on it. So the reason for wearing a waist leash on a river is there are often obstacles in the river, trees, fallen trees, and that you could potentially get your leash wrapped around and caught. You need to be able to release yourself from that immediately. So having a toggle on the waist is super easy. Just pull that toggle and you are free from any obstructions. Whereas an ankle leash on a river can be a bit dangerous because it can be more tricky to release if you get it caught on something. And unfortunately, people have drowned from getting caught on and getting stuck underwater from having the leash caught. So in kind of enclosed water, I'd wear a waist leash in harbours, that kind of thing. When I'm out on the ocean, I'll often wear a leash on my ankle because that's more comfortable for me. Confined waters, I would say a waist leash. If you're predominantly out on the ocean, particularly if you're surfing or anything like that, an ankle leash is fine. But there are loads of, if you check out the Water Skills Academy, they have some brilliant, amazing courses on sub safety and some great advice there as well on sub safety. Okay, the last question I've got is, do you have advice or process for the reuse or recycle of plastics? So I'm not really sure what the specifics of this question are, but in terms of the reuse and recycle of plastics, I'm sure you've read over the last few years in the media about how not all of our plastics that go in our green recycling bin are actually recycled. So with this one, it's really tricky and it's very, very different council to council. Some waste is burnt, it's incinerated, some waste is recycled. A lot of plastic that we use in our everyday life, there are hundreds of types of plastic. A lot of it is difficult to recycle and it has a very low value, so economically recycling it isn't viable. And unfortunately, a percentage of the plastics that we do put in our green bin won't be recycled. And that's unfortunately the reality of it. And I think we've got into this kind of system of we throw our stuff away and once it's gone, it's gone. And this idea that it's gone away, and actually there is no away. That sounds, I know it's a bit of a cheesy phrase to say, but it's easy enough for us to believe that we've done our bit and it's gone. But actually, the best thing that we could do would be to use less plastic, use less single-use plastic wherever we can. And that's really, really tricky to do in everyday life when we're busy, and especially, if we've got kids or if we're, running around like headless chickens half the time, which I know a lot of us are. But I do think, having made a journey into using a lot less single-use plastic now than I ever used to, and even down to things like the clothes I buy, I try and buy second-hand clothes or clothes made from natural materials, so they're not going to shed microfibers. It is hard work sometimes, but it feels worth it every time that I kind of make the right choice. It feels really good, and it does give me a kind of sense of there's this kind of thing about cognitive dissonance. If you do something that isn't aligned with your values, it can actually harm your psyche. And I definitely find that personally. If I've got, at the end of the week, my recycling bin's absolutely full of plastic, then it doesn't fill me with joy and happiness. So I think, wherever we can, using less. And this isn't just about plastic, like I was saying before. This is about reconsidering our relationship with single use and our convenience lifestyles, because we've become so accustomed to just being able to go to the coffee shop, get a takeaway coffee and chuck your cup away, or go to the supermarket and buy everything wrapped in plastic. And that's how life is at the minute. And actually we need to, as many of us as possible, need to be making a stand against that and making the choices that are available to us to use less plastic, and supporting the businesses that are making that as easy as possible for us. So anything you can do is a huge bonus, and I thank you all for everything that you are doing, because I know it's not easy. So that is the end of the questions, and really I would just like to, thank you again for taking the time to write in these questions. It's really great to have you involved and have you engaged, and we're here to answer these questions and to try and keep these conversations going. So stay involved, keep talking about this, keep getting involved with the One Change campaign, and just try and keep that positivity and that good positive movement and energy going, so that we can continue to make positive change, because it's happening slowly, it is happening, and it's going to take every single one of us and every business and the government to make the kind of big steps that we need, but it's starting to happen. So thank you, and thank you for all the lovely comments about the film. I'm really glad you enjoyed watching it, so great. Okay, thank you very much everybody, bye.